Welcome to the Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I am Charlie Eisenhood, publisher of Multi-World Disc Golf. Josh Mansfield is out this week. He's sick. We hope to have him back next week, but we are happy to be joined by former Upshot co-host, co-founder here on the show, Steve Hill, now over at UDisc as Director of Marketing. Steve, what's going on, man?
Charlie, good to see you, man. Thanks for having me on. My goodness, when I saw you earlier this week in San Diego and said, hey, if you ever need me to tag in, I didn't think it would happen this week, but stoked to be back. You can always come home, right? I love this show. So thank you. You
certainly can.
Thank you for having me on, and hope Josh is on the mend soon.
Yeah. He's getting his tonsils out, it sounds like. So he's been basically unable to speak on a podcast, but I know he appreciates you being here and filling in. And I know. A great chance to see you in San Diego. I was just at the Ultimate Frisbee National Championships, and it was in San Diego. So got a chance to see Steve. He came out to the first annual Ulti World Open, the C tier, the XC tier, following Ultimate Nationals. We played at Morley Field. It was a lot of fun. And congrats to Ella Hansen, who won an FPO, and Jack Hatchett, who won an MPO, for taking down the inaugural tournament.
Was this the first tournament that you have run, like the first disc golf tournament that you've run? I forgot to ask you that.
I would say yes, sort of.
You did one earlier. That's right.
I did the Ultimate Disc Golf Derby, which was like the collab between PDGA and USA Ultimate,
right,
where everybody had to play with an Ultra Star, only an Ultra Star. That was, it was a disc golf tournament, but it felt a lot different than this, where there was actual payouts and, a little bit more organized. Shout out to Alan Risley for all his help. He truly made it from something where I would have had no idea what I was doing to being like a pretty legit event. So appreciate Alan, and seems like just like, he's like the disc golf kingpin of tournaments in San Diego, as far as I can tell.
Man, I just totally lucked into meeting Alan like when I first started playing disc golf, and I didn't even live in the San Diego area. This is when I lived further in the Inland Empire, and I played an ice bowl. I think this might have been like the first tournament I ever played. I played an ice bowl out in Redlands, and he's good friends with Bill Morey Holmes, who ran that tournament, comes down and helps Alan with Goat Hill and everything like that. And so, my first tournament exposure was being on a card with Alan, and I now live like down the street from him. And I'm just so fortunate because he does that. You want to run a tournament, he will help you and get you totally set up and on the right path. And he just cares so much about everyone having a great tournament experience. And it looked like you guys were having one. Everyone seemed to be having a really good time. And tournaments at Morley, man, the evolution of having tee times at Morley Field is just incredible to be able to have weekday tournaments there now. It's super cool.
Yeah, shout out to those guys. As far as I understand, this is one of the first tournaments that was not operated by Morley on the Morley, course in many, many years. So something has changed recently. It sounds like this is going to become more of a possibility in the future. My only regret was not booking a couple tee times out before the start of my round, because there were some, as is the case at some courses, and particularly Morley, there was some mob golf happening out there that slowed down the first couple of cards. So that is a learning moment for me in the future. But shout out to those of you who I got to meet, whether they were folks in the Ultimate world or I met some pure disc golfers who listen to the Upshot. So thanks for listening. Hope you're listening today, and thanks for coming out. It was great to meet you and see everybody out there. And we've got a big show. We've been kicking this can for a while, and Steve, you get to pick up the can with me.
I love it.
Talk about the 2022 schedule, and that's where we're going to start today. So let's just go ahead and quickly run down the schedule, the basics of it, and then we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about the flow of the tour and everything else. So more or less, the tour, although there's some events that have moved around on the calendar, this is more or less the same basic structure that we've had now for some time, with most of the same events that we saw in 2021 coming next year. So here's what you got. Las Vegas Challenge, late February, comes up first. And remember, everything now is Disc Golf Pro Tour. There is no national tour. DGPT has absorbed the NT. Everything is a Disc Golf Pro Tour event or a major. So the Las Vegas Challenge kicks off the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Then we go to Waco, early March. Texas State, which comes over from the NT onto the Pro Tour, late March. The new major, the PDGA Champions Cup, that's the stroke play followed by the match play.
Right.
That's happening in Appling, Georgia at the IDGC in mid-April. Then we drive back west to Jonesboro, Arkansas for the Jonesboro Open in late April. And then the Dynamic Disc Open in Emporia right at the end of April, beginning of May. Then we head out to California as we begin the West Coast swing. OTB Open is May 20th through 22nd. Then we have the Portland Open further up the coast. Note, no Masters Cup on this schedule. The Preserve follows in Minnesota late June. U.S. Women's is in early July in Madison, Wisconsin. Idlewild Open in a week after that in Kentucky. And then head over to Europe for the European Open. Finally coming back. Cannot wait for that tournament to come back. That's July 21st to 24th in Finland. Back to the U.S. Deglow, late July. Ledgestone, early August. Des Moines, late August. And then Worlds in Emporia. Again, back to Emporia right at the end of August, beginning of September, like right around Labor Day. Green Mountain. So you got to go from Des Moines to Kansas, and then the long drive to Vermont. You get about 2 weeks to get out to Vermont for the Green Mountain Championships, the MVP Open a couple weeks later, and then the USDGC and the Pro Tour Championship. Pro Tour Championship still TBD on location. It is not confirmed. We may be back at Hornets Nest. We may not. So we can talk about that, Steve.
Okay.
So there is your schedule. What you will note is that 4 of the 6 NTs from 2021 do not return to the Elite Series schedule. So the Beaver State Fling and Masters Cup are going to be Silver Series events. And that will be what it has been, fewer points available, media coverage, but less so, probably just final round coverage. A lot of these details are still TBD. The Music City Open in Nashville is being considered for the Silver Series, but apparently it's been hard to find a good weekend to fit into the schedule. That's what Jeff Spring told me. And then you have Delaware not on tour in 2022. Apparently the tournament itself didn't want to be on the tour. And it's felt a little bit like a bad fit for a couple years now, just given the growth of everything, and like added cash numbers have been really weak at that tournament. And it's a challenge. They can't really charge for admission. And so that tournament, at least for now, not set to be on tour. So that's the basic framework. Steve, when you take a look at the whole thing here, besides the sort of continuity from 2021, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think obviously, it is nice to have that continuity. I kind of fall on the side of I'm hoping that we get to a point where maybe we cycle in a couple of other stops occasionally just for freshness. But I guess we did get that this year. We had Des Moines as a first timer back on the tour this year, coming back, which I think is a good thing by all accounts. That was pretty well received, especially in the cash department. If I recall correctly, they raised a boatload of cash for that tournament.
They kind of kicked off the boom in Elite Series added cash that we saw at the end of the season. You could argue that Worlds did that.
Sure,
I think
kind of
Worlds
expected,
is kind of its own thing, right? Exactly, and with way more players too. But Des Moines, despite having like a little bit of a weaker field because it came right after Worlds, did have a ton of added cash. That is true.
Yeah, I would say other points that stand out, just geographically speaking, the Texas Champions Cup Jonesboro is a little bit awkward. We can maybe talk about that a little bit more. And then obviously The biggest thing that I'm curious to see about is well, there's two things. Number one is attendance at that July swing of Idlewild European Open Deglo. Especially the last couple seasons with no European Open, it's really put the spotlight on Deglo. That was one of my favorite events to watch this year. Holy cow, that was so much fun. And I'm wondering if we, see a situation where maybe the upper echelon of the field isn't there because they're either, recovering from European Open or even staying over in Europe longer and playing some other tournaments or just, traveling.
Vacationing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's beautiful there. Why wouldn't you? And then the end of the season, the kind of the new playoff type structure with GMC and MVP. It's just GMC and MVP, right? That being right. Called DGPT playoff tournaments, cutting the field size and everything like that, I think is a really interesting concept, kind of taking, inspiration from the PGA Tour. So those are the things I'm really excited to see. On the first side of it, going from Texas State's out to Georgia, back to Jonesboro, I guess my main concern with that is what kind of ramifications that has on Jonesboro. I think I've really developed a soft spot for Jonesboro since it has come on the tour. I think it's almost like an underdog story of the tour. It's this smaller town. The event kind of started as a B tier when it was first on the tour. They've had some issues with like the property in terms of I think there was potential that there were like some outside interests trying to buy it and develop it or something like that, but that seems to have been rectified, thankfully, because it's one of the few venues on tour that's truly built for disc golf specific. And like the TD there, Brad, they roll out the red carpet. They get a bunch of local sponsorships. They do a huge push for local media. They bring in like a big animated scoreboard, and like there's just a lot of flourishes that I think that tournament has really put in. And I think it's a sneaky underrated venue for what you get for the type of shot variety and just the excitement of the tournament. And I wonder if, you have this 5-day grind of a major. Granted, for most people, it's 4 days, right? It only becomes 5 days for the final card at the
right.
Champions Cup. But I wonder if people are going to potentially skip Jonesboro after that major. And I hope not, because I think it's one of those tournaments that kind of deserves your attention. Those would be my initial overall takes on the schedule. Obviously, I have West Coast thoughts too. We can talk about that too. So
I mean, let's just take a look at the calendar here. So Texas State, March 25th through 27th. Then the Champions Cup, about a 12-hour drive from Tyler, Texas to Appling, Georgia, is basically 2 weeks later, April 13th.
Plenty of time. Plenty of time to get there.
I think there's clearly room there for people to even take some time off before heading to Georgia for this new major.
Yeah.
But then the turn from there to Jonesboro is 5 days. So you finish the Champions Cup on the 17th of April, and then Jonesboro starts the 22nd. And that's not as much of a drive. It's more like 8.5 hours.
Okay, that's not as bad as I thought it was.
So, I mean, it's not ideal. I don't think anybody would argue that it's ideal. But I think that it's doable if you want to. And, like, here's the thing about Champions Cup. Are we going to see everyone play it? I know it's a major, but it's not going to have the same gravitas that Worlds, USDGC, US Women's, Pro Tour Championship have, European Open. Like, it's going to be at the bottom of the totem pole. In fact, Paul Macbeth put out his 2022 tournament schedule. He's skipping 2 events that are on the Elite Series. Las Vegas to start the year, and Champions Cup.
Yeah.
Now, who knows? This is obviously subject to change. He put this out in October of 2021. We have a long time until then. Like, is Macbeth really going to choose to skip a major? If so, that seems to bode poorly for that tournament and like its status as, you know, this is going to test whether putting an M next to a tournament is going to give it clout.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you on that. You know, I almost look at it as similar to where the DGPT championship was a few years ago.
Sure.
Coming right after USDGC, trying to, you know, get some bandwidth and some oxygen back from that huge major. And I think it's over the years, through the different format and just the mass amounts of cash, has been able to successfully do that. I think I didn't feel the big like USDGC hangover going into DGPT championship this year that I feel like has been there in the past. And even to some degree, you know, and I can speak to this. I've gone to both events back to back when they would go USDGC to Hall of Fame Classic out in Appling. Hall of Fame Classic would they're just
zero
everyone
energy.
Was done. Everyone was cooked.
Everyone was done.
You know, end of the season, you go through a major, everyone's done. Now, this tournament being at the beginning of the season, I don't think is going to suffer from that. But if you don't have some of your biggest stars there, then yeah, that doesn't bode well. However, you know, it's so weird to think that Paul Macbeth is just going to be like, no, I'm fine. I don't need that major title. So
it's like, almost, you almost can't believe it, right?
I think your framing of it as subject to change is probably the best way to put it, because you know, if anything, Paul Macbeth elevates his game for the majors. And like, yes, this one may be a new major. And the format, say what you will about it, and maybe this is like some kind of silent protest. I haven't heard anything from him about why he has opted to not put that on the schedule. But man, if you can go stack an M next to your name, regardless of if it has the stature quite yet, you know, we could look back in 5 years if this is successful and still be talking about the first one. So I hope that he'll end up being there, but then at the same time, you know, if you're anyone else in the MPO field and you're like, Paul Macbeth's not at this major? Okay, well, that gives me at least a slightly better chance. But then I guess the flip side of that coin is, how do the fans and, you know, pundits like us talk about that major if Macbeth is not in attendance?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we'll see. We'll see about that tournament. I think I can't say it enough. I think having an early spring major is critical. I'm very excited that there is a new major on the calendar, because I think we need to have 4, and I think we need to have one, because if we didn't have that major, we wouldn't have one until the middle of July for European Open. Well, I guess US Women's is early July, but you know, that's a long time to go from February to July with no major. So I'm very pro having a major. I question whether this format is the right approach, but we'll see. We'll see.
I think, you know, this is one of those things in disc golf that the sport is still, you know, we're growing up and everything, right? But I think we're still at the point maybe where we can experiment with a couple things. Now, do you experiment with a major? That's up for debate, I guess, depending on how much you care about the sanctity of what a major is. I think maybe the bigger misstep in all this was some of the initial communications and getting feedback from the players. I think that probably could have been executed a little bit better. But at this point, the format is what it is. Players are going to have a chance to go and take a big major title, and let's see it happen. And then we can, you know, there will be plenty of time to judge the format, I think, afterwards.
After the fact.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's going to be, you know what, like, I think people will still get pretty hyped. I like match, but I personally, I don't know, I just want a full match play major. I know there's all kinds of other headaches probably to deal with that. I really enjoyed the DGPT match play this year. Maybe it doesn't need an M next to it, but just different formats I think are a good thing occasionally to mix it up.
And let's be honest, the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship at this point is a major in all but the M next to its name.
Right.
So I think over time, these things get codified, and it's not all. I don't think it's always going to be up to the PDGA what is classified as a major. Obviously they get to put an M or not, but I think that the Pro Tour Championship is probably at the point where it deserves to get one.
I mean, yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I would have put one on Throw Pink this year.
Sure.
That's a whole other discussion, I suppose, for another day. But yeah, I think the other part, if we're kind of circling back to the schedule, is there's a pretty big gap this year between DDO and OTB Open,
yep,
which has generally been
almost 3 weeks.
It's generally had, you've got Goat Hill, which I don't know if that's going to be a Silver Series or not. And then obviously Masters Cup. If we know that Masters Cup is going to be a Silver Series, I'm guessing maybe that means Goat Hill isn't going to be, but I would imagine Goat Hill will still run around there and maybe try and pick up some people who want to go make some money that weekend. I think, Masters Cup as Silver Series is probably not the worst move. I think it's still a very hallowed kind of event that players do want to go play, but there are the obvious technical challenges of how the DGPT operates now as both tour entity / media company. And so, until there's some better broadcast abilities at Masters Cup, and same with Beaver State, unfortunately, I think we kind of have to accept the reality of, maybe a couple of those beloved stops we might not be able to watch them live, but if there's still a tournament there and enough players go, you can follow them on Jomez or Gatekeeper or UDisc or whoever decides to go.
Sure.
And honestly, man, plan your spring or summer vacation around those two events. Those are two of the best cities you could go to to both watch and play disc golf between Santa Cruz and Portland.
That's why I think they need to find their way to the Elite Series, back to the Elite Series in the future. I think there's various ways you can address this. So, I mean, Jeff Spring talked specifically about the things that were a struggle for those events and why they're not on the Elite Series this year. De La, they had frustrations about it being a non-standard layout because it had 24 holes.
Yep. With
a lot of crossing fairways. So the word is that this coming year, they're going to go to 18 holes, and they're going to, as a result, be able to reduce some of that risk with crossing fairways by just reducing the number of holes that get played, and you can kind of make the layout a little bit more what you want it to be, as opposed to just playing the classic full course. And then obviously there's no cell coverage there for live coverage. So I think we're going to see the last round be at the golf course. We're going to see live coverage on that final round, Silver Series. And I think in the future, I understand why the Pro Tour wants to have live coverage be available for all of their sort of elite series events. But, let's not forget that, Ledgestone is on there, and their course has significant cell problems at Northwood Black. We couldn't even watch a front nine, and we're not seeing them get rid of that. I mean, maybe they're going to alter that course again, but to some extent, I do think it's on the Pro Tour to figure out technical solutions to this in the long run, as opposed to, getting just like dumping a course because it doesn't have good cell coverage. Like Milo up at Beaver State is a great course that should probably be involved in the Portland Open, right? I think that the ideal world for me is make Portland Open a 4-day event.
Yes.
Do two rounds at Milo and 2 rounds at whatever this new course, what's it called? Or wherever they decide to put it. Why
am I forgetting the name right now?
It's because it's new this year.
But I mean, you could even go back to Blue Lake. I know people really missed Blue Lake this year too.
Totally. So you have all these great courses in Portland. I mean, you might even mix it up from year to year. And if you can't have cellular reception to do live coverage on 2 of the 4 rounds, we're going to survive. I think it's important to keep these classic courses as a part of the tour unless you feel like they are just no longer sufficient to be, popular with pros. But that's not the case. Like, people love playing Masters Cup. People love playing at Milo and the Beaver State Fling. So solve the problem. And if that means no live coverage, I think we can live with that to some extent at some of these classic courses.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's just something that I want to point out. I think another big note about this year's schedule, there's less back-to-backs.
Good.
Which, yes, good is right.
That run of that
the
late
Midwest,
summer, holy cow, yeah.
Too much.
Yeah.
Way too much.
And
too
we weren't
much
even
for players, too much, in my opinion, too much for fans. Like, I get that some people can just, lock in and watch tournament all these weekends in a row, but I don't think it's it's not the optimal way to market your biggest events to have them all in a row like that.
Yeah.
Eventually one of them suffers with attendance because people want to drop out or they get hurt or they get tired or whatever. That is less the case this year, which I'm really glad to see. You mentioned it. D-Glow comes just 5 days after the end of the European Open. That event, D-Glow in the past struggled with attendance specifically because of this reason. I think that event has a little bit more clout these days, but
100%.
But it still may struggle just due to the logistics. Are people really going to want to turn around, fly back, and jump right into a tournament again after this pretty important major? I mean, that's the first serious major for MPO. Champions Cup, we'll see how that plays out. And then, the women have beginning of July U.S. Women's, and then European Open. Like, are they going to want to come back out and start playing right away again? Maybe, but I do think you're going to see attendance down this year because of that.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm curious to see out of all this is, previously the tour maturity, I guess you could say, was at the point where there was only a select group really of top flight players who could afford to go to European Open.
Right.
And I think that's probably changed pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. Obviously, we don't know yet. We haven't seen registration for any of these events, but I would bet between the higher, income in the sport now for more players, plus just chomping at the bit to get over to Europe again.
And probably
I think
we're going to
see probably fat payouts. I think we're going to see a lot more American players going over there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And if you're running D-Glow this year, it's really hard, right? Like Nate Heinold came in, ran that event this year, made a bunch of upgrades to the park, higher payouts, bigger tournament, just everything like that. You almost wish they could get like just one extra week in between there. But then you go a D-Glow Ledgestone back-to-back. Is Nate Heinold still running both these tournaments this year? They're back-to-back 2 weeks apart. I can't believe that, man. I mean, if anyone could do it, it's going to be Nate, but that's just a lot.
That's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, let's talk about this playoffs. MVP, GMC, the final two events of the season, will be limited registration based on point earnings to that point. So I would also like to point out that players will now be able to earn Disc Golf Pro Tour points at majors. That's not something that has happened in the past.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And there'll be a bonus for the majors relative to regular Pro Tour Elite Series events. And then the Pro Tour playoff events will also offer more points than regular season events. So the loose plan, is that about 100 MPO and 50 FPO competitors will get into GMC. And then 80 MPO and 40 FPO will get into MVP Open. And then they're going to cut down to the Pro Tour Championship field, which reportedly may be 40 and 20 instead of 32 and 16, like it was this year and for the past few years. So, you go from 100 at GMC to 80 at MVP to 40 in MPO, and you go 50, 40, 20 in FPO. Now, regional players in the Northeast have expressed concern about not being able to play at these events because of this structure. It's not clear at this time exactly how qualification is going to work, but there will still be regional qualifying spots at those tournaments, as well as all Disc Golf Pro Tour tournaments. But it may mean that you have to, finish in the top X of another local tournament or a series of tournaments in order to qualify for a spot, because we are quickly on the path, Steve, to getting to the point where you're not just going to be able to be 1,000 rated player and get into a tournament and to a Pro Tour event. You're going to have to be a card carrying professional or qualify in on some kind of qualifying tour or qualifying tournament. And we are like maybe 2 years away from that being like there being no longer ratings, based registration, and it's all based on qualification.
I mean, I love it. It's disc golf growing up, right? Like if I want to play the Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines down the road for me, I can't just walk up there, throw down my cash, and get in no matter what my rating is. Granted, I would never do that. But
there's probably some amount of cash that you could throw down to get into the tournament.
I'd have to be a sponsor level, and I'd maybe like get to play a round before the tournament starts or something, right? Like I'm not participating in that tournament as even if I'm a regional pro. It's just not happening, right? And so I think this is just that continued evolution of disc golf becoming more professional. I do somewhat empathize with the regional pros, but not all the way, because if I wanted to go play GMC or MVP, I live on the West Coast. It's hard for me to get there. Like anyone can have that complaint. And arguably the regional players live near those awesome venues and get to go play them when there's not tournaments. So I'm somewhat jealous. You look like you got a thought here.
Well, I think that it's important that there remain the ability for players to qualify in that are not just touring professionals. I mean, I think that's important for cultural, like local reasons. I think it's important that players have the ability to feel like, not everybody's going to want to be a touring professional. And there should be some way that like I can play a local B or A tier, finish in the top 10, and qualify for a spot at the local Pro Tour event. I don't necessarily care what the exact mechanics of that is.
But just that you have an opportunity.
There needs to be some way, yes.
Right.
Because there's going to be new players who pop up who are exciting, who maybe are going to be touring players someday, and they need to have an opportunity to go and get known and get the opportunity to compete. We don't want to just silo off the whoever 80 players, 100 players that like to tour week in and week out and say, you just get to play all these big events and no one else gets to compete. And I don't think that's the intention at all, but I think it's important that we find ways to continue to allow that, right? They already have sponsor exemptions and things like that. But I do think we're getting to the point where you can't just be a good player and expect to be able to sign up. You're going to have to actually go win something to be able to compete at these top events. And I think that's fine.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think there's a fairness aspect there to where it's not just pay to play, right? It's earn your way in. And I think that's a pretty important component. And that's, really, I think the regional players would probably appreciate that, because then it gives them even more clout going into that event. If they've won their regional qualifier, maybe that gets them on the feature card or one of the film cards or something like that too. I think there's some cool incentives that the Pro Tour could work into those qualifiers as well for those players and give them that recognition. Because I agree, I think about GMC. I think Alex Benson was playing on the FPO feature card this year, and it was one of the first chances for her to really get in that kind of spotlight. I do think that's very valuable. So I don't mean to disparage the regional players and with my Torrey Pines analogy, but yeah, if I could qualify for the Farmers Insurance Open, cool. I'm still not making it, but if there's an opportunity, I agree. That's great. I think the other part of this that's really interesting about this stretch of the season, between both the regional qualifier aspect, if that is the case. And then more specifically, the playoff aspect, man, as a fan, I'm stoked about it because it's like, it's almost like the rich get richer. People already love watching these tournaments for how great the venues are and how great the golf is at MVP and GMC. And now you add higher stakes on top of that with more compressed fields and potential cut downs all the way to the
bonus
tour championship
points towards qualification into the actual championship.
I love it. It's you can't ask for more than that as a fan, I think. And I commend the Pro Tour for that. Like, they really are, they've really realized that disc golf is turning into a very fan-centric, at least on the pro side, right? It's turning into a very fan-centric activity. We've seen that with how many spectators are coming out this year. And I think just having more stakes, having more emotions in play, having a little more riding on those couple of tournaments at the end of the season just makes it more exciting, and it puts more value on the preceding events too, which I think is just as important.
Here's my wish list for 2023 schedule: a Southeast swing early in the season with like some Florida tournaments and other stuff going on in the Southeast. You already have Champions Cup in April. You could even move that into early April. And you can get some of those tournaments. Maybe don't start in Las Vegas, start in Florida, something like that.
I've been banging that drum for years. Like, as much as I don't want to take away from Vegas, they have a great venue, great club. They run a really awesome tournament. I would love to see more of a backwards S shape of the tour as opposed to this, like, I guess it's kind of a forwards S and does some weird stuff. I don't know. Yeah, it's an odd shape right now. Having a Southeast, there's a lot of great courses and a lot of great culture for disc golf in the Southeast.
And we kind of ignore it besides USDGC and Pro Tour Championships.
Yep.
And the occasional events at IDGC. But there's great courses in Florida. I'd love to see that get on the tour sometime. And it's plenty warm there in Florida in February. Wish number 2. European Worlds, or really just non-US Worlds. I'm ready. Yeah. Everyone's ready. Let's do it.
I think it's going to be. It could be European Worlds, or look, Dark Horse Canada Worlds. Like
Canada Worlds.
There's some rad venues up in Canada, and some huge explosive growth up in Canada.
It feels like a letdown to have Emporia Worlds this year. I'm sorry. I love Emporia. I love the folks at DD. We already go to Dynamic Disc Open. Like, I don't really want to go back. I think that's kind of annoying. I liked Utah. It's something different. And now I want to see some more things different internationally to really represent the fact that this is a World Championships. And man, the Europeans deserve it after not being able to compete at the highest level for 2 years basically.
Yeah, I think more of what you brought up about going to DDO and then back to Emporia is maybe the switch that I hope that we get to see in the future. Is that okay? It's similar to in 2018, GMC hosted Worlds, or I'm sorry,
right?
Smuggler's Notch hosted Worlds. There was no GMC,
so there was no GMC.
Didn't do that with Peoria in 2019.
Didn't love that either.
Exactly. So doubling up on the venue in the same season for Worlds and another elite tournament. Yeah, I'd like to see that maybe get thought about a little more.
And my third wish list item, and then I'd love to hear if you have any, is we need, for lack of a better way of putting this, relegation of the worst Elite Series events and promotion of new ones.
Oh,
I think there's going to be tournaments that are always on tour. MVP Open is always going to be on the Disc Golf Pro Tour because it's the best course in the United States, and great. But we don't need to have all the same events every single year. It's starting to feel a little stale, to be honest. Not that there aren't a lot of great tournaments here. I'm excited for most of these events, but I would also like to see some new ones. I think that that's probably going to happen in 2023, but we keep not getting new ones really. Not completely, right? Preserve is new, Des Moines is new, OTB Open is new, but I still think that it's time to start mixing things up a little bit and moving things up and down silver to elite, in order to just have some spice and new variety.
I think the difficulty of that, I'd be curious, what do you put as your standards for promotion/relegation? Is it quality of venue? Is it the number of spectators? Is it added cash? I mean, because
some combination thereof.
Yeah, that's the hard part. No, I think it'd be really interesting to see a concept like that come up and what kind of conversation that would drive. I mean, I know personally, I won't say the events I'm thinking of, but like there's a couple events out there that I'm not the biggest fan of because I just don't really like watching the golf at those places. And would I like to see some other tournaments? Yeah, absolutely. I think my wish or my like random concept that I would like to see, and maybe this could help with the, you know, De La Milo issue, although I haven't really sorted through what would join them on this. I would almost like to see there be like a classic series where you have players going and playing some of these more old school classic venues that, you know, people love to stop by, love to play, love to go watch the players there, but for one reason or another, maybe aren't up to snuff on the you know, the either the technology or the you know, course length or something like that to be deemed championship level. Maybe that's what your Silver Series becomes. I don't know. Maybe that's you can still have some of these old school venues, these places that people love, and go to them if you want to and earn some points and maybe have a little bit of media coverage. And then you don't lose the roots of the
Right.
sport. Because I think that's really the concern when we circle back to the De La and Milo issue is you've had these, I mean, De La, I think, 35 years or something they've run Masters Cup, something like that. You don't want to lose that.
Absolutely. Absolutely
and
not.
So let's figure out how to keep it and make it more fun. Maybe it's not as high stakes, but maybe
I love the concept.
maybe it's a classic cup or something.
The
like that.
classic cup, there's an actual cup that you win if you win
Big
the
old
event.
cup.
And you know what you can do? You can do things that are really interesting. Like you could have that be bid out like the media rights to a non-Jomez coverage team, right? Let that be its own thing and give a cash prize for the top 5 finishers or something in the Classic Cup. Because like there's room for non-Pro Tour like tournament series happening. Because right now Silver Cup just feels like it's AAA for the Pro Tour.
Sure,
but
yeah.
You could have little mini 3 to 5 tournament separate things that kind of have their own little structure where you can earn points. Like the NBA has been talking about doing a mid-season single elim tournament, kind of like the FA Cup in English soccer.
Right.
And, you know, I don't necessarily think we need to do something like that, but you could have something that has stops along the tournament, along the tour, and maybe not everybody plays it, but if you have players who just love playing in these classic events, that's a great concept. It's a great concept. We cannot lose these these really legendary courses simply because they, you know, don't have cell coverage. I think that I reject the notion that we have to have live coverage of every single round of every single tournament in order to enjoy that part of the tour.
Free idea for the Pro Tour or whoever wants to do it. This'll you start this in 2023 and you started at La Mirada with the 20th anniversary of the Golden State Classic. And I'm going to take it one step further with this whole Classic series. Just let's get crazy and like change the format in terms of like what you're allowed to bag. No, nothing above a speed
That's fun.
9. Give me speed 9s and lower, and then we really get to see some stuff. And then Climo can come out and play against Macbeth, and we can really settle the GOAT debate and all that stuff. It'd be great.
I mean, there's real opportunity there. You know, this is something the PDGA could do too.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need to be the Pro Tour. You know, the PDGA, like building in some Hall of Fame stuff around the Classic Cup or whatever you want to call it, and playing some of these legend events, Memorial. Not that the course is special, but the tournament is special.
Love it. People love it.
People love it.
Yeah.
There's probably other past tour stops that
Brent Hambrick Open.
Get revived.
Yeah. Rochester. Yeah. There's a bunch.
Yeah. Anyway, that is the 2022 schedule. Let us know your thoughts. Upshot@ultiworld.com. Hit us up in the Discord. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. Maybe it's time to get yourself a spooky Halloween version of an Octothorpe. You can get your own custom bag on Monday, November 1st, starting at 12 p.m. Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern. That's when registration opens for the next batch of custom bags from Pound. So you can get exactly the bag of your dreams, even in black and orange, just in time for Halloween. Go to pounddiscgolf.com to learn more. And by Diameter Apparel. We all know the difference that confidence brings to disc golf. When you're comfortable, you're focused and confident in your game. Diameter Apparel is for disc golfers who want to be comfortable during their casual, league, and tournament rounds. In fact, Diameter supplies teams and trophy jerseys for many tournaments and events. Made right here in North America, Diameter Apparel's designs stand out and will inspire your best performance. Diameter is breathable, Diameter is durable, Diameter is beautiful. Wear what the pros wear, Diameter Apparel. Go to diameterapparel.com to learn more. Welcome back to the Upshot. It's time to go inside the circle. So off we go. Josh isn't here today, so I will lead the way. And Steve, you give your thoughts on these stories. Drew Gibson, we mentioned this briefly last week. Drew Gibson signs what is being called a lifetime contract with Infinite Discs that guarantees to pay out millions of dollars. Okay, so they're making discs in the Infinite line. Presumably, Drew's getting commissions on all of those sales, and we're talking about a, for life kind of deal for Drew Gibson, and that's going to add up to millions over time, given the sales of discs that we have seen. Thoughts on this sort of unusual contract announcement and Drew Gibson's commitment to a mixed bag and playing with his primary sponsor as a retailer?
I mean, I think it's great in terms of the flexibility it gives him. I think Drew is the kind of player who having this kind of deal is really going to help him because it's done now, right? Like he, at least in some regard, we don't know the details of how much, but he has some level of security now, and he's the kind of player who I think with that in the rear view as not a concern, he can go out and drop more of those like 70 footers on the regular, and I think be a little more competitive because his mind is free of some of that stuff. So that's my big take on that, is just being able to have that out of the way for a player, especially someone like Drew, who has bounced around a little bit from some sponsors, has done things a little bit unconventionally. He kind of gambled on himself, and it's paying off right now. I love it.
So he's basically going to get a brand new line of discs that he designs, and they're going to be manufactured and distributed in partnership with Infinite. So who the source manufacturer is going to be is unknown. I mean, it even could be multiple companies potentially.
Yeah.
Infinite does have an existing relationship with Innova as a manufacturing partner. So we'll see how that works. This is separate from his athlete contract with Innova and his putter-only endorsement contract with EV7.
Does he have an athlete? He has an athlete contract with Innova?
I said Infinite. I may have said
Infinite.
Innova.
Okay.
Infinite.
Sorry, that threw me off. Okay.
My bad if I misspoke there. He gets a salary and benefits from Infinite with this athlete contract that is separate from this probably commission-based deal that he's getting with distribution and manufacturing. He's going to own his own line of discs. Yeah. This is savvy stuff. I mean, I don't know where Drew Gibson's compensation ranks in the wider world of, top MPO players. Gibson isn't Ricky Wysocki. He isn't Paul McBeth. And yet he's getting this giant deal where he's able to have more control over his own product line. This is very smart. I got to give credit to Drew for this. And, he still gets to throw whatever he wants in his bag. It sounds like a win-win.
That freedom, I think, is so huge. And I'm curious to see what other players eventually go that direction. If this is out there now for a player of Drew's level, who is very good, don't get me wrong, but there are higher ranked players than him who might want a little more freedom.
Sure.
And I'll be curious to see if anyone starts to try and chart that path on their own. I also wonder, how long does this get us to where I'm looking forward to the day where a player is sponsored by some big company that's not even in disc golf, and then they're just throwing whatever they want because it works for them, right? And then maybe they pull in some, they got a driver sponsorship from this company and their putter sponsorship.
More or less how it works in golf.
I'm excited for that. I think this is just the stepping stone toward that happening. I'm curious, Charlie, and I don't know if you've done any reporting on it or talked to him anything. This was kind of, as far as I understand, one of the newer negotiations of this new DGPM group who is trying to help negotiate disc golf athlete
We got
contracts.
agents coming around.
Yeah. Have you had any contact with them yet or anything?
I have to say I have not talked to them. This
Okay.
Gibson news dropped right before Ultimate Nationals, so I've been kind of getting back on the train here. But I look forward to writing about that in an upcoming Cashline newsletter that's available to Ulti-World Disc Golf subscribers. So
see, I just wanted to tee that up for you.
Love it.
By the way, people who are listening to this, Cashline, legit the best newsletter in disc golf. I probably said this on the last show I did with you guys, but I always look forward to it. Subscribe just for Cashline.
Appreciate it. And you also get Upshot bonus segments. This week's is about what disc golf can learn from Ultimate Frisbee. Okay, so I have some thoughts on that. Last thing I'll say about this Drew contract, lifetime contract. I have no idea what the contract language looks like. I would be hesitant to be signing any kind of lifetime anything, given where disc golf is right now.
Yeah.
What if you get 5-10 years down the road and you're massively underpaid relative to the current standards? I assume that Drew has it in such a way that, if Infinite is selling more discs, you're getting more dollars in your pocket, period. But there's risk with anything, like any kind of lifetime. What does that even mean? Contracts are not signed for lifetime. It's too, I don't know. I'd love to see the actual legal paperwork on this. Because
it's maybe attempting to sound a little
bigger than it is.
Than it needs to, really.
I get the feeling.
This can be watershed without having to have that language on it.
It's easy to say you're getting a deal worth millions if you sign a 50-year contract that's worth $20,000 a year. Technically, that's worth millions. I'm not saying that's what this is, but there's clearly an attempt in the way that this was kind of presented from a PR perspective to be a little puffed up. But you know what? Drew's going to get paid, and he's got a lot of flexibility, and I think sounds like a smart situation.
Yeah, I think those are the biggest takeaways for me, for sure.
Next up, inside the circle, Kristin Tattar signs a 4-year, $500,000 extension with Latitude 64. So for those of you doing the math at home, that's $125,000 a year.
It's pretty good.
She had just signed a 3-year extension with Latitude 64 before the 2020 season, and so she was still under contract, but they tore that up, and they signed this new one. Tattar said, "I am ready to play and tour more in the U.S. All the big tournaments are there. So when Latitude 64 gave me the opportunity to commit even more to disc golf, it was a no-brainer. I'm happy and grateful to be able to play disc golf for a living. It means everything to me." Tattar is currently the second highest rated FPO player at 978 and won back-to-back disc golf pro tour events at the Preserve and Great Lakes Open. So, big money, not Macbethian, but this is the biggest announcement of an FPO contract that we have yet seen. I believe that Paige Pierce makes more than this. That's what I've heard. That contract has never been announced by Discraft. This puts a little pressure on them maybe to make an announcement whenever they re-sign her.
Yeah, I think honestly, and this is not to take anything away from Drew Gibson and Infinite Disc. This announcement to me is more significant because we have contract terms and years and dollars, and this is something that a fellow FPO player could take and negotiate with. And we know now that there is, yes, we know Paige Pierce is making boatloads of money. We're aware of that. It exists in the atmosphere. We know she's getting paid a lot. We don't know exactly how much. We now know that there is a women's disc golfer making $125,000 a year to play professional disc golf. That is significant. That is huge, if we're being honest. And so I commend Kristin, I commend Latitude for not just making the deal. Honestly, if Latitude didn't make that deal, it'd be crazy to not do it. But I commend them for actually publicizing the details, right? We say it all the time. We've said it earlier this show. The sport's growing up. This is the kind of stuff you get out of other sports. Knowing that compensation level now gives other women something to aim for. And it appropriately compensates a top-tier athlete. Kristin Tattar, number one player in our world rankings on UDisc. Like, she ends the season as that. She just went and now parlayed that into a huge contract. And again, security. Same thing with Drew Gibson. She's got 4 years now where she doesn't have to worry about any of the contract. She can just come over here, rec shop, and know that she's going to get paid. It's phenomenal.
And I want to point out, I saw a little chatter online about, this isn't enough. Like, Kristin Tattar deserves more. I can't speak to the business negotiations here. I have no idea how much plastic she's moving for Latitude 64. What I can say is that $125,000, which is, let me just do the calculation here in the current exchange rates, 107,000 euros a year. That is a fat salary in Europe. $125,000 in the United States. That's a very good salary, but that's like starting level salary for a lot of software engineers, medical lawyers, like that kind of money in Europe is really impressive. I looked up what's the average salary in Estonia, and the average salary is less than $20,000 per year.
Yeah, I believe it. And
there's a much bigger social safety net in Europe, and so you don't necessarily need to make as much money, but $125,000 a year is like really significant amount of money for somebody living in Europe, as their permanent residence. So I think it's a really good deal. You have to keep that in context. Like, that would be a really good salary for pretty much anybody in the United States as well, but it's especially good in Europe to be making over 100,000 euros.
Yeah, that's really important context. I'm glad you looked that up. It's and I think again, it's 2 years ago we weren't talking about any of this. It's so insane crazy how quickly all this is going. I love it.
You mentioned earlier that, in the past you'd see like 10 US players at European Open. It was like the top players, the top 5 to 10 players in MPO and the top maybe 5 total in FPO would go to Europe to play. And we're going to probably see most of the tour in Europe for the European Open this year.
On the flip side of that, I do wonder what kind of ramifications this has for other European players to make the leap to come over here. Kristin had to do a lot. She had to jump through a lot of hoops, her and Silver, to get over here this year. And, she took a lot of time away from her family.
Yep.
Paid a lot of money out of her own pocket to do these traveling expenses and came over here, won a lot of money, and now has won more money. And I think this could be, we're always talking about, let's get Evelina over here, right? Let's get Henna over here. Let's get Vanamakel over here and Albert and all these. I wonder if this opens the floodgates a little bit more to some of these players saying, you know what, like, I can go to the U.S. and I can win some tournaments and elevate my profile, I'm going to do that. I hope that's what happens.
I do too. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the European scene develops as well, given that there are at least some countries where disc golf is as popular relatively to the U.S. or more so than the U.S., particularly in the the Nordic parts of Europe. Final stop here on the Inside the Circle, and then we got a little over-under for you. Well, it's been all the talk on social media this week. Austin Hannum on Twitter came out with another one of his hot takes. And so he tweeted the following: disc golf hot take, eyeballs emoji. All right, disc golf Twitter, what is everyone's opinion on biological males playing in the FPO division at PDGA at Disc Golf Pro Tour? This proceeded to create a firestorm of controversy about the tweet. The comments were mixed. There were a lot of people calling out Hannum for the framing of the I guess this is a question. Clearly, Hannum referencing transgender females playing in FPO, and subsequently, Prodigy Discs, his sponsor, actually put out a statement of their own, and Hannum also released a statement. Prodigy Disc said, yesterday, Austin Hannum posed a question on his Twitter account, which has led to harmful comments directed at valued members of our disc golf community, including teammate Natalie Ryan. My aside, Natalie Ryan is a transgender female that competes in FPO. Prodigy continued. We support Natalie as a team member of Prodigy Disc. We are grateful she chose to represent us this past season and welcome her to continue in 2022. We strive to be an inclusive organization that provides a safe, supportive environment for all fans and competitors. We regret that comments were made in contrast to those values. Furthermore, Natalie's participation in FPO is within the current guidelines of PDGA and DGPT competition standards. That quote coming from Michael Sullivan, the president of Prodigy Disc. Austin Hannum also released a statement in regard to my last tweet. I never meant to insult anyone in any way. It saddens me to know that I caused such a problem. I've never in my life been phobic towards anyone ever. I actually enjoy how we as people can decide what to do with ourselves as we please. My entire reason for tweeting was to ensure the security of the current FPO field. I know how hard they have fought and how far they have come as a division. I put trust in the rules that we have in place and hope that there won't be any controversy towards anyone moving forward. Again, I sincerely apologize for any harm that I may have caused. So you can wade into the comments on Twitter, on Facebook, on Reddit. There's, I think, over 1,000 comments in the Reddit thread about this on the most recent thread. And there's some thoughtful conversation. There's also a bunch of trash. I don't really even know where to start here, Steve. Your take.
Well, look, I know you and I kind of talked about off the air how maybe we're not the perfect messengers for this, right? We are both white cis males, and I think that is important context that we need to bring to the discussion at the top of this. So we're not necessarily going to have all of the answers. My take though is it was stupid, right? Like the comments were inflammatory. They were intended to be inflammatory, I think. It literally was a hot take, and hot takes are not meant to be lacking in stoking conversation and sometimes division. And this certainly succeeded in that. I think the framing of whether Austin knew it or not, the framing of transgender women as biological males is inflammatory. It is something that he shouldn't have framed it like that, and he has been pretty summarily dunked on across a lot of different platforms, and he kind of deserved that. At the same time, I appreciate that Prodigy did come out and support Natalie. I don't think a couple years ago that happens. I think it shows that the sport is evolving. I think there's still a long ways to go in terms of how people view this conversation. And I would also say, instead of letting Austin Hannum or anyone in all of the comments of everywhere educate you on this, Natalie Ryan did a phenomenal interview on Smashbox earlier this week, and her bravery to encounter all this and address it the way she has with as much dignity and grace as she has, I think that's what I want to take away from this. There's progress that needs to be made, and there are very brave people who are working to make that happen. And I support her in that, and hope that she continues to find success in this sport.
And other transgender players.
Absolutely.
Whether they play at high levels or in local C tiers. I think disc golf has a big problem. I talk about this in this week's subscriber bonus. It's getting better, but disc golf has a big problem with pretty much being a sport for straight white dudes. And that is the predominant culture on the course. It is the predominant culture in the online conversation. And unfortunately, I think it can be very off-putting and, unpleasant for those who do not fit that mold, whether that be kids, women, transgender players, people who aren't, 30 to 50-year-old white dudes on the course. And I'm sure that's a lot of our audience. I'm not meaning to call you out. I am one of those people. I think that most people who listen to this show are good people who want to welcome everybody into disc golf. And I would say that still represents the large majority of disc golfers. But you have to be willfully blind not to see the god-awful online comments that come up in every, Disc Golf Pro Tour live stream comment thread and every Facebook comment thread. It can be a real cesspool at times. It really can. And, unfortunately, I think Austin Hannum is like creating a cesspool here. Like, he is part of it. And there's like two sort of distinct issues here, right? It's like, how do we be welcoming to people of all types in disc golf, which is like the fundamental issue. When we have 93% male membership at the PDGA, we need to think about how we can improve on that. And like, this isn't it. There is the question of how do you deal with transgender players in a competitive sporting sense? This is a question that is being dealt with actively by sporting organizations across sports. The IOC, in fact, is like in the midst of reconsidering the guidelines on how trans athletes can compete in the Olympics. And they basically have had a difficult time coming to agreement. They didn't come to a new standard before the Tokyo Games, and they're trying to get there before the next Olympics, which is 2022. I honestly, I don't even remember. Winter Olympics coming up next. Other sporting organizations are also dealing with this. So the IOC standard, which is what the PDGA follows, the current IOC standard, basically says if you're a transgender woman, you have to have undergone 12 months of hormone therapy to suppress testosterone creation and have a certain level of testosterone below a certain level in the blood. And if you are a transgender man, you're allowed to compete freely. Now, the logic here, I think, is clear enough. The idea of having women's divisions is to acknowledge that there are differences between men and women when it comes to, the physical advantages for certain sports. And so, disc golf being one of those. On average, men can throw further than women because their musculature and bone structure, et cetera, is enhanced by the fact that they have high levels of testosterone relative to women. So this has been in place, but a lot of other organizations are not necessarily looking at it that way. In fact, USA Ultimate, which governs Ultimate Frisbee, just changed their policy a couple of months ago, and their policy is basically compete in the division in which you feel most comfortable, and there are no medical restrictions. There isn't somebody checking to see, making you take a blood test to see if your testosterone levels are at the right level. So they're taking a very, very inclusive approach, which, I think makes a lot of sense in ultimate frisbee. And perhaps in disc golf or in other sports, it may not make the same amount of sense, but it really depends on where your priorities fall as to whether you want to focus on inclusion or you want to focus on like maximum competitive fairness to like try to like dial in the specific hormonal levels in the blood and like what is fair and what is not. It's a difficult conversation, but I think that the way this is all played out with Austin Hannum just like spouting off on Twitter again after doing this and, being like inflammatory with a lot of topics a year ago in the off season, this is not the way to approach the conversation in any way.
Yeah, you nailed that. And I think if we are going to have this conversation, I say we as a, writ large populous community and everything, just at least have the decency to learn the correct language and the respectful language and respectful terminology. I understand there are people who are not going to be open-minded to transgender women playing in women's divisions. It's been made very clear that there are people who do not like that. That does not mean that you, because of that, have the right to erase the language that acknowledges their existence and what they live through. That would be something that I would just encourage people to educate themselves on. And it's not something that I expect people to be perfect on. People are going to make mistakes. Charlie and I don't know, we could go back and listen to this and realize we fouled something up. I don't know. But if you root the conversation first in respect and decency, I think that's where we need to start. And that is definitely where it was not started. And even in some regard, it was not finished. I think that the language in Austin's statement had some dog whistles in there too that are very unfortunate. And so my hope is that, you kind of made it at the top of your point, Charlie, is that disc golf does need to work on this. We talk a lot in disc golf about how welcoming this sport is. And that is often very, very true on the course. You go to your local disc golf course, you go and try and get on a card with somebody, start around. You're going to play, you're going to get along, you're going to have a good time. Disc golf doesn't only exist on the course. There's a whole separate subculture of online for everything, including disc golf. And so if you want to prove that disc golf is open and welcoming, that can't just be restricted to your card mates or the people you are throwing with that day. It's got to extend to the other parts of the disc golf environment. And so that's where I hope we can make some strides out of all this.
Let us know your thoughts, Upshot at ultiworld.com. That's going to do it for Inside the Circle. Really quick, before we go, we've got over-under. You know it. It's Thursday. And my over-under, and I'm going to let you set the number, Steve. What is the value announced for Missy Gannon's upcoming contract? We don't know who it's going to be with. She's up for renewal. Maybe she stays at Discraft. Maybe she doesn't. But given that we just saw Kristin Tattar announce at 4 years, 500, maybe we can say what's the average annual value in order to make it kind of like a fair comparison. If she gets 2 years versus 10 years or whatever. Average annual value of Missy Gannon's contract starting in 2022.
Man, that's a tough one, right? It's hard to set an over under because my take is actually that we're not going to find out. I don't think there's going to be an announced value.
We'll have to nullify in that situation.
I think the announced value conversation right now is still more of a rarity than the norm. That said, let's entertain the conversation, right? If it's announced value, I'm going to set the average annual value. I'll set it at $100,000.
That's the right number. I was hoping you would make a mistake and I could get an easy pick.
I think it depends on length of contract too, right?
I'm gonna. I'm gonna take the over. I think that Missy's play at the end of the season is going to be very helpful in her negotiations, and now has this data point announced, perfect timing for her to be like, well, I also won these, number of Disc Golf Pro Tour events, and I also have increased my rating, and I also won the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship. It's the right number. I wouldn't be surprised to see it come a little under that, but there's also now going to be pressure on companies to want to beat that 125.
Yeah.
Right? And kind of show the support that they're giving to their players. So I'm going to take the over, and you're going to be stuck with the under.
99, 999, 99.
It's probably going to come in at exactly 100, and it's going to be a
10
wash.
years or something. No, I don't know. I actually, more interesting to me will be the length of contract than.
If you're Missy,
anything.
do you want to sign a 2-year deal or do you want to sign a 10-year deal? Let's
10?
assume the numbers are comparable year to year.
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm getting up in age, but I want the security. Give me the longer deal.
Okay.
So that I know I can just go and play and not think about my contract at all. That I have a solid flow of a salary.
I think people signing long-term contracts right now is risky business.
You get an opt-out
because of the
right?
growth of the sport and how much more money could be on the table 5 years from now. It's there's a sort of salary cap that keeps going up. That's doesn't exactly exist, but the companies are making so much more money that more money is going to players. I don't know.
At the end of the day, though, these are endorsement deals, right? And endorsement deals you can stack.
You can stack. That's a good point.
Maybe it's a 10-year deal to throw only Discraft. That doesn't mean she's not going to have an extra fat deal to wear Adidas.
Athleta.
Or yeah.
Good point. It's a good point.
It's going to be fun, though, man. It's an exciting time right now.
It sure is. All right, well, that is going to do it for today's show. Check out our subscriber bonus, What Disc Golf Can Learn from Ultimate. discgolf.ultiworld.com/subscribe is where you can sign up. It's less than $4 a month. You get that, Cashline newsletter, and more. We've got some big announcements coming up in the next couple of months as we head towards 2022. We'll keep you posted on that. And hopefully Josh is well and back with us next week.
For sure.
And Steve, thanks so much for stopping by. Great to have you.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on. It was a blast. I'm going to give a quick plug real quick. It's the end of the show. I don't know if anyone's listening. We have 15 hiring positions right now for UDIS. Go to udis.com/jobs.
Software engineers mostly or what?
Everything. Mobile, web, marketing, product, internships. We got all kinds of stuff. We're in a big growth moment, just like everybody else is. So if you want a job in disc golf, thank you. If you want a job in disc golf, come and give it a shot. You can find them at udis.com/jobs. That's the only plug I wanted to make. Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Of course. So for Steve Hill, I am Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we will talk to you next week right here on The Upshot.